My name is Serena Mitchell. I'm 28 years old, and I'm speaking to you from a rooftop garden overlooking Detroit, Michigan, the same city where I learned what it means to be valued and what it means to be absolutely, completely invisible. If you are listening to this, I request you to please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and press the bell icon for more videos like this in the future. So let me start at the beginning. I was born in Detroit on a Tuesday morning in March at 7:23 a.m., a fact I know only because my father wrote it down in a leather-bound journal that he kept his entire life. My mother, Diana, was 23 years old. My father, Robert Mitchell, was 25. They were young, in love in that complete and total way that young people are, desperate and certain all at once, and they had built something small but real in a working-class neighborhood just off Livernois Avenue. The neighborhood wasn't fancy. The houses were modest, single-family homes with small yards and driveways just wide enough for one car, but there was something about it that felt alive. People knew their neighbors, people looked out for each other, children played in the streets until the streetlights came on. My father was a mechanic at a Ford dealership across town. He would wake up at 5:30 a.m. every morning, shower, dress in his work uniform, navy blue coveralls with his name embroidered on the chest, and drive across Detroit to the dealership. He worked 10-hour days, sometimes longer. He came home tired, with grease under his fingernails that he couldn't quite get clean, and smelling like gasoline and metal. But he was never too tired for me. I have memories of him coming home and immediately asking my mother where I was, and when she would bring him to me, he would scoop me up and hold me high, and I would laugh because I was small and he was strong, and it felt like he could hold up the entire world if he wanted to. He had strong hands. I remember being fascinated by them as a child. They were large, capable, scarred in places from years of work. They understood engines and systems and how to fix things that were broken. He would sit at the kitchen table with me when I was maybe 4 or 5 years old, and he would let me trace the scars on his hands, and he would tell me stories about how he got each one. "This one," he said, pointing to a long line across his palm, "is from a wrench that slipped when I was working on a transmission. I was 20 years old and thought I knew everything. Turns out I didn't." "Does it hurt?" I asked. "Not anymore," he said. "It hurt when it happened, but the body heals. That's what I love about the body. It heals. It tries to keep going even when things break." My father wasn't a rich man, far from it. We lived paycheck to paycheck. My mother worked part-time as a nurse at a hospital downtown. Even with both of them working, money was always tight. There were months when my mother would sit at the kitchen table with bills spread in front of her, and I could see the stress written all over her face. But my father was a meticulous man in a way that mattered more than money. He kept records. He tracked every dollar. He had a system. He would get paid on Fridays, and he would sit down that same evening with a piece of paper, and he would write down what bills needed to be paid, in what order, and how much would be left over. And when I was born, he did something that most people in his position would never think to do. He opened a savings account in my name. I remember my mother telling me this story when I was older. I was maybe 8 years old, sitting in the kitchen while she made dinner. She was telling me about my father in that way parents do, telling me the stories that make them remember why they loved someone. She said my father had come home from work one day with a passbook. This was before everything was digital, when banks still gave you physical books to track your account balance. He'd shown it to her with a kind of pride that didn't require money to feel justified. The account was started with $500, which was nearly 2 weeks of his salary at that time. Just $500, but it meant something. "This is for Serena's wedding," to my mother. His voice, according to my mother, had been very certain. "I want her to have choices. I want her to start her married life without the burden of debt or dependence. I want her to know that she's valued, that she's worth investing in, that her father believes in her future so much that he's willing to work for it right now." My mother had cried when he said that. She'd told me years later that it was one of the most beautiful things he had ever said to her, not because of the money, but because of what it meant, It meant he believed in my future. It meant I would have a wedding, that I would have love, that I would have a life worth building towards. So I'm going to put money in this account every single week for the rest of my life if I have to. And when Serena gets married, she's going to have choices. She's not going to have to depend on anyone. She's going to start her marriage from a place of strength, not desperation. For the next 12 years, my father did exactly what he promised. Every Friday, without fail, he would put money into that account. It wasn't always the same amount. Some weeks he could only put in $20 because unexpected expenses had come up. Other weeks, when he'd worked overtime, he could put in $50 or even $75. He kept a record of every deposit. I found that record after he died, and I still have it. It's in his handwriting, dated entries going back to the day I was born. March 15th, initial deposit $500. March 22nd, $25. March 29th, $30. Every week documented. Every week a commitment. By the time I was 12 years old, that account had grown to over $43,000. With compound interest and with careful management by the bank, it had become something substantial. And my father never once treated that money like it was a sacrifice. He treated it like it was something he was privileged to do. Our home in those years was modest but full. My mother loved to cook, and even though money was tight, she made sure our kitchen smelled like home. There was always something on the stove: collard greens, mac and cheese, fried chicken, cornbread. My father would come home from work, and the smell of food would hit him before he even opened the door, and he would smile. My father had this habit of picking me up after school. My mother would be at work, and he would arrange his schedule so he could leave the dealership at 3 p.m., drive across town, and pick me up at school at 3:45 p.m. It wasn't much time, but it was hours. We would drive to a park near our house, and we would sit on a bench, and he would ask me about my day. And he would actually listen. He would put his phone away. He didn't check it, didn't let it distract him. He would just listen while I talked about what happened in math class, or about the girl who was mean to me at recess, or about the book I was reading. "You know what I love about you?" he said to me once when I was maybe 10 years old. We were sitting on that bench, and I had been telling him about a test I was worried about. "You think things through. You don't just react. You think about problems and you try to understand them. That's going to serve you well in life, Serena. That's going to help you make good decisions." I remember looking at him and thinking, this is what it feels like to be valued. This is what it feels like when someone believes in you. My father died when I was 12 years old. It was a Thursday evening in October. The weather had been getting cold, and my mother had been talking about pulling out the winter clothes. My parents had been discussing whether to take me trick-or-treating the following week or let me stay home with friends. There was debate in the house about it. I was at that age, 12, where you're caught between childhood and something else. Your friends think trick-or-treating is for babies, but you're not quite old enough to admit that you still want to go. My father was driving home from work. It was 5:43 p.m. I know this because the police officer who came to our house told us. He had been leaving the Ford dealership, heading east on Detroit Avenue toward our neighborhood, toward home, toward the dinner my mother had been preparing: fried chicken and collard greens and cornbread, his favorite. There was an intersection at Detroit and 12th Street. It was a busy intersection with traffic lights and everything. It should have been safe, but there was a car, an old sedan with a driver who was either drunk or asleep or both. The witnesses said later that the sedan hadn't even slowed down. It just ran the red light at what must have been 50 miles per hour. My father's truck, a 2008 F-150 that he'd bought used and kept in pristine condition, washing it every Sunday, changing the oil religiously, treating it like it was precious, was crushed on the passenger side. He died before the ambulance even arrived. I was at school. I remember my principal, Mr. Henderson, coming into my math class at 6:17 p.m., which doesn't make sense because school ended at 3:15 p.m., but I was at after-school care in the gymnasium, working on a project for science class. I remember Mr. Henderson's face. It was the face of someone who had done this before, who had had to deliver bad news to children, and who knew how to do it gently. "Serena," he said, kneeling down so he was at my eye level, "I need you to come with me. Your mother is waiting for you in my office." I remember not understanding why my mother would be at school. It was evening. She should have been at work at the hospital. I remember a feeling of wrongness, like the ground had shifted slightly under my feet, like I was about to find out something that would change everything. What I didn't know was that the thing that was about to break was the entire foundation of my life. My mother picked me up from the principal's office. She didn't speak during the drive home. She just gripped the steering wheel and drove, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. I knew something was catastrophically wrong, but I couldn't ask her. I was frozen in that space between childhood and maturity, unable to move in either direction. At home, there were relatives. My father's brother was there. My mother's sister was there. There was crying. There was a phone call with a lawyer. There was, eventually, a police officer coming to explain what had happened. I remember the officer's words feeling very far away, like they were being spoken in a language I didn't quite understand. What I remember most clearly is sitting on the couch in our living room, the one that my father had picked out at a secondhand furniture store, the one that was faded but comfortable, and my mother kneeling in front of me, and her saying, "Your father has gone, baby. He's gone. He's not coming back." I didn't cry then. I would cry later, for years, in ways that surprised me when I was doing mundane things, washing dishes, sitting in class, riding the bus, walking past the park where he used to take me. But in that moment, I just felt very cold, like all the warmth had drained out of the world. The funeral was held 2 weeks later. The church was full. My father had been the kind of man who people liked, not someone famous or important in the way the world measures importance, but someone who showed up, who was reliable, who fixed your car when you needed it and didn't charge you extra when you were struggling, someone who remembered people's names and asked about their families. I remember standing at the front of the church next to my father's casket and not being able to cry. I remember relatives coming up to me and hugging me, and me standing there, stiff, feeling like I was watching the scene from outside my body. My father's brother gave the eulogy. He talked about how Robert was the kind of man who would show up at 6 a.m. on a Saturday morning to help you work on your car, how he would never take money for it, how he believed in taking care of people, how he was meticulous and careful and loved deeply. And he loved his daughter, my uncle said, looking directly at me. He loved her so much that he started putting money away for her wedding before she was even old enough to understand what a wedding was. That's the kind of man Robert was. He thought ahead, he planned, he cared. After the funeral, after the relatives had gone back to their lives and the casseroles had been eaten, my mother sat down with me at the kitchen table. She had papers in front of her. She had a statement from the bank. "Your father set up a trust," she said. Her voice was very steady, but I could see her hands shaking. "It means the money has been saved for a specific purpose. You can't touch it until you turn 21, unless there's an emergency. And then, when you get married, it's all yours. It's your father's gift to you. He wanted you to have choices." She pointed to the number on the paper. Over the years, with interest and with the life insurance payout that my father's employer had provided, the fund had grown to exactly $87,543. "That's enough," my mother said, and her voice broke as she said it. "That's enough for you to have a beautiful wedding without worrying about money. That's what your father wanted for you. That's what he worked for." I remembered touching the piece of paper, as if somehow my fingerprints on it could anchor me to my father, could make his love concrete and real in a way that talking about it couldn't. The years between my father's death and my 16th birthday were not easy. Without my father's steady income, and with my mother's grief making it hard for her to focus on her job, money became very tight. My mother began working 2 jobs. She worked as a nurse at a hospital downtown during the day, 12-hour shifts that left her exhausted, and then she worked as a housekeeper for families in the suburbs in the evening, cleaning their homes, making minimum wage plus tips, coming home around midnight. She was gone before I woke up in the morning, and she came home after I was already in bed most nights. I learned to cook. I learned to do laundry. I learned to keep track of our bills. I learned to be the adult in the house in ways that 12-year-olds shouldn't have to be. I would make dinner for myself on the nights my mother worked. I would set out her dinner so it would be ready for her if she came home hungry. I would clean the house. I would keep track of when her shifts were so I could make sure she had lunch packed. I also learned that my mother was lonely in a way that was deeper than just missing my father. I would hear her sometimes, late at night, sitting in the kitchen with the lights off and the refrigerator humming. I would hear her crying quietly, trying to muffle the sound with her hand so I wouldn't hear. I would pretend to be asleep when she walked past my room because I didn't know how to comfort her. What could I say? Your husband is gone and it's not fair and you deserve better? I was a child. I didn't have those words. But I watched my mother and I learned something important. I learned that my mother, who was strong and capable and intelligent, was also fragile in a way that losing my father had made permanent. I learned that she needed someone to take care of her the way my father had taken care of her. I learned that she was looking for that, searching for it, in a way that made her vulnerable. I didn't blame her when she met David Turner. It was at the hospital where my mother worked. He was a hospital administrator, which in my mother's world was basically the equivalent of being royalty. He had an office, he had a secretary, he made decisions, he wore expensive suits instead of scrubs. He was charming. He had a nice smile and kind eyes. He remembered people's names. He would call my mother Diana in that way that made her feel special, that made her feel like she was different from all the other nurses in the building. He noticed when my mother was having a hard day and brought her coffee. He asked her questions about her life, and he actually listened to her answers. Or at least he seemed to. I met him for the first time on a Saturday afternoon in late April. My mother had asked me to dress nicely, which should have been a warning sign. She'd also asked me to smile and be friendly and to make sure my hair looked neat and to make a good impression. These were all warning signs that I didn't recognize at the time. His name was David Turner, and he was standing in our kitchen when I came downstairs. He was wearing a casual button-up shirt and expensive jeans. His shoes looked like they'd been polished that morning. He had that look of a man who took care of himself. Expensive haircut, cologne that smelled like money, the kind of careful grooming that suggests time and attention and resources. Serena, my mother said, and her voice had a quality I hadn't heard in years. Hope. This is David. David, this is my daughter, Serena. David turned to me and smiled. It was a warm smile. It reached his eyes. He seemed genuinely happy to meet me. I've heard so much about you, he said. Your mother talks about you all the time. This was true, and it made me soften toward him immediately. He had noticed something important about my mother, had cared enough to remember what mattered to her. He understood that the way to a mother's heart is through her children. Over the next few months, David became a regular presence in our house. He came for dinner on Saturday nights, he brought wine for my mother and offered to help her cook. He asked me about school. He seemed interested in what I was learning, what I wanted to do with my life. He was, in short, everything that my mother needed. He filled the space that my father had left. He was attentive, he was present, he seemed to care. And he was everything that I thought I needed too. A father figure, someone to fill the void, someone to take the burden of adult responsibility off my shoulders. After 3 years of being the adult in the house, of cooking dinner and doing laundry and keeping track of bills, I was exhausted. I was 12 years old and I was so tired of being responsible. When David offered to help with bills, when he offered to take some of the burden off my mother, when he suggested that she didn't have to work so hard anymore, it felt like salvation. It felt like rescue. I was naive. I didn't understand that rescue sometimes comes with a price. David proposed to my mother in the fall of that year. He didn't propose with a big romantic gesture. Instead, he did it quietly at their apartment one evening, and my mother came home that night glowing with a kind of happiness that I hadn't seen in years. "He asked me to marry me," she said, and her voice was trembling. "He wants to marry me, Serena. He wants to take care of us." I remember being happy for her. I genuinely was. I remember thinking, maybe we're going to be okay. Maybe things are going to get better. I didn't understand that things were about to get much, much worse. They got married in a small ceremony at the courthouse in the spring, just the three of us, and my mother's sister as a witness. It was quiet and simple, and my mother cried, happy tears this time, not the quiet grief I'd heard for so many years. David moved into our house. He took over the mortgage payments from my mother. He wanted to adopt me legally, but my mother said no to that. "She has a father," my mother said firmly. "He's gone, but he was hers. I won't let anyone take that away from her." David seemed to accept this gracefully, though I sometimes saw something flicker across his face when my mother said things like that, like disappointment or maybe resentment, like he'd expected her to agree with him, and the fact that she didn't was a surprise he didn't appreciate. David and my mother had a daughter together. Her name was Jade, and she was born when I was 17. She was beautiful in that helpless, dependent way that newborns are. She had her father's eyes and her mother's nose, and everyone who visited us commented on how perfect she was. I was a good older sister. I wanted to be a good older sister. I helped with feedings at 2 a.m. when my mother was exhausted. I changed diapers. I babysat when my mother and David wanted to go out. I treated Jade with the affection that comes naturally when you're someone's older sibling. But I started noticing things almost immediately. The first thing I noticed was how differently David treated Jade than he treated me. With Jade, he was attentive in a way that he was never been with me. He was affectionate in a way that made me realize how absent he had been in my life. He would hold her for hours, talking to her, making faces to make her laugh. When she cried, he would jump up immediately, asking my mother what was wrong, what he could do to fix it. He would rock her and sing to her and look at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. With me, his behavior shifted. Not obviously, he was too smart for that, but noticeably. He became less present. When I tried to talk about my day at school, he would check his phone. When I asked him for advice about something, his responses became shorter, more dismissive. He stopped asking me questions about my future. He stopped picking me up from after-school activities. It was subtle enough that I could almost convince myself it wasn't happening, but I could feel it in my bones. I was no longer the person whose opinion mattered in the house. I was no longer the child who was worth investing time in. I was the stepdaughter, and increasingly, I was the older sibling who was taking on more and more responsibility for Jade, while my stepfather barely acknowledged my existence. When Jade was 3 years old, David's behavior toward me shifted more dramatically. The subtlety began to fade. The cruelty became more overt. He started criticizing things I did. The way I helped with Jade. "You're too harsh with her. You need to be more gentle." The way I dressed. "Those clothes don't look appropriate for someone your age. You look like you're trying too hard." The way I spoke. "You sound ungrateful when you talk like that. Your mother does everything for you and you act like you're suffering." He never did this in front of my mother. He was careful about that. He was strategic. He would say these things when we were alone in the kitchen, or when my mother was in the shower, or when she was at work and I was babysitting Jade. But Jade was always listening. Even when she was small, she was listening. And she was learning how her father talked about her older sister. She was learning that there was a way to talk to me, a tone to use, a disrespect that was acceptable. I didn't tell my mother about this. I told myself I was protecting her. She was happy for the first time in years, and I didn't want to be the person who ruined that. I told myself that maybe I was being too sensitive, that maybe David was right about some of these things. I told myself that I was the adult, that it was my responsibility to keep the peace in the house. What I was actually doing was letting myself be slowly erased. What I was actually doing was learning to make myself smaller and smaller so that I wouldn't offend my stepfather, so that I wouldn't upset my mother, so that I wouldn't disturb the fragile peace we had constructed. Over the next 6 years, the abuse became systematic. It was designed, I realize now, to accomplish a specific goal, to make me feel like I was worthless, like I didn't belong in the family, like my mother had made a mistake in keeping me around. David controlled the narrative. He would tell my mother things that I had supposedly said or done, things that I had never said or done, and my mother would believe him. She wouldn't ask me for my version. She would just accept what David told her and treat me coldly as a result. There was one instance that stands out. I was 15 years old, and I had made dinner one night. My mother was working late, and David was home with Jade. I made my mother's favorite meal: baked chicken, rice, and steamed broccoli. I set the table carefully. I even lit a candle. When my mother came home, she looked at the dinner and smiled, but then David said something to her in a low voice, and I watched her expression change. Later, she came to me and said, "David told me you made this dinner just to show off. He said you were trying to make him look bad by showing him up in the kitchen." I had made dinner because I loved my mother and I was trying to help, but I was suddenly made to feel like my love was an insult, like my attempt to contribute to the family was actually an attack. "That's not what I was doing," I tried to explain. "Well, that's how it came across," my mother said coolly, and she wouldn't discuss it further. This happened again and again. David would interpret my actions in the worst possible way, and my mother would believe him. Eventually, I stopped trying to do nice things. I stopped trying to contribute. I made myself as small as possible. Jade, watching this, learned the lesson her father was teaching her, that it was okay to disrespect her older sister, that their stepfather approved of it, that in fact, he preferred it. When Jade was 6 years old, she started taking things from my room without asking. Small things at first: hair clips, a pen I liked, a piece of gum. When I asked her to return them, she would refuse, and when I went to my mother would say, "She's just being a kid. She's testing boundaries. You should let her explore her independence." But when David's things went missing, it was treated as a tragedy. Everyone had to stop what they were doing to help find them. It was an emergency. When I was 16 years old, Jade hit me. We were in the kitchen, and I had asked her to move so I could get past her. She refused, and when I gently tried to guide her, she hit me on the arm. Hard. There was a mark. I was shocked. I looked at David, expecting him to discipline her. Instead, he laughed. "That's my girl," he said. "Don't take any shit from anybody." He said this while looking directly at me. He was celebrating his daughter's aggression toward me. He was encouraging it. My mother looked uncomfortable, but she said nothing. After that, Jade knew that she could hit me without consequences. She knew that her father would actually reward her for it, so she did it more often. Not hard enough to leave bruises that would be obvious, but hard enough to hurt, hard enough to make a point. She would pinch me when she thought no one was looking. She would accidentally step on my foot. She would take my things and hide them. She would call me names that her father used to describe me: selfish, ungrateful, mean. And my stepfather would watch this happen, and he would smile. He would congratulate his daughter for standing up to me. He would tell her that she was right to not take my attitude. By the time I was 17, I had learned to make myself invisible. I would come home from school and go directly to my room. I would stay there until it was time for dinner. I would eat quickly and quietly, and then I would return to my room. My mother would sometimes come to talk to me, and her voice would be apologetic, but she would also be defending David, explaining his behavior, asking me to understand his perspective. "He's just trying to help you become a better person," she would say. "He loves you, he just has a different way of showing it," she would say. "You have to understand that he came into this family and took on a lot of responsibility. The least you could do is respect his efforts." Each of these statements felt like a knife. Each one felt like my mother was choosing David over me, over the bond we had shared, over the years I had been there for her when no one else was. When I turned 18, I had planned a birthday celebration with some friends. I had arranged to go to the movies and then to dinner. It was a small celebration, nothing fancy, but I was looking forward to it. My stepfather found out about it the day before my birthday, and he told my mother that he thought it was selfish of me to make plans on a weekend when the family needed me to babysit. She's 18 now, he said in that reasonable tone of his, the one that made everything sound logical. She's old enough to understand that family comes first, but instead she's being self-centered and making plans for herself. It's disappointing. My mother, already feeling guilty, agreed with him. She came to me and asked me to cancel my plans. She said the family needed me. I was furious. I was 18 years old, and I had spent 6 years taking care of my family, and I couldn't even have one night to celebrate my own birthday. But I canceled my plans anyway, because I was afraid, because I had learned that when I defied David, my mother would side with him, and I couldn't bear the thought of my mother being angry with me on my birthday. Instead of going out, I spent my 18th birthday babysitting Jade while David and my mother went to dinner. Jade was cruel all evening, deliberately annoying me, testing to see what she could get away with, and I just sat there, taking it, because I was too tired to fight. University became my refuge. I went to Michigan State, studied business administration, and slowly started to rebuild a sense of self that had been systematically dismantled in my own home.
I was good at school. I was good at understanding systems, analyzing problems, finding solutions. I made friends who treated me with respect. I joined clubs, I volunteered. I started to understand that the way my stepfather treated me wasn't normal, wasn't something I deserved. But I also couldn't quite shake the belief that maybe he was right. Maybe I was difficult. Maybe I was too independent. Maybe there was something wrong with me that made him treat me that way. My college roommate, a girl named Keisha from Chicago, called me out on this one night during my sophomore year. We were studying for an economics exam, and I'd made some comment about how I probably wouldn't do well on the test because I wasn't smart enough, that I didn't understand economics the way some people naturally did. "Are you kidding me?" Keisha said, setting down her pen and turning to face me directly. "Serena, you have a 3.9 GPA. You're literally the smartest person I know. You explain concepts to me that I don't understand. You're like a walking economics textbook. Where is this coming from?" I didn't answer immediately. I didn't know how to explain the voice in my head, a voice that sounded like my stepfather, but also sounded like my own voice by now, because I had internalized it so completely, telling me I wasn't good enough, that I was ungrateful, that I was the reason my family was unhappy. "Is it your family?" Keisha asked, moving closer to me on the bed we were sitting on. "Is someone telling you that you're not good enough?" And I broke down. For the first time since my father died, I let myself cry in front of someone. I told her everything about my father, about how he had loved me so completely, about David, about the years of being treated like a burden, like a problem that needed to be solved, about how my mother had slowly abandoned me to keep the peace, about Jade, about being bullied by my own sister while my stepfather watched and smiled, about the constant criticism, the constant implication that I was somehow responsible for my stepfather's unhappiness, that my very existence was an inconvenience to the family. Keisha listened to all of it without interrupting, and then she said something that changed my perspective fundamentally. "That's called emotional abuse," she said. "That's a recognized form of abuse, and it's not your fault. You're not the problem. He is." "But he's right about some things," I said, still crying. "I am ungrateful. I am selfish. I don't appreciate what he's done for us." "No," Keisha said firmly. "He's a narcissist. That's what narcissists do. They take good things they do and they use them as ammunition. They make you feel like you owe them your entire existence because they paid for dinner once, and then they use your guilt to control you." I didn't believe her at first, but over the next few years, I started to understand that she was right. I started to go to therapy. I started to name the things that had happened to me. I started to understand that my stepfather's behavior had very little to do with who I was, and everything to do with who he was, a man who needed to control things, who saw my independence as a threat, who had chosen to attach himself to my mother specifically because she was vulnerable and lonely, and who had spent 6 years systematically destroying my sense of self because it gave him a feeling of power. I met James Williams in my junior year of college. He was in my business ethics class, and he was exactly the kind of person I was learning not to trust. Charming, confident, successful, the kind of man who seemed to move through the world with ease and certainty. The first time he approached me was after class. We had been discussing corporate fraud, and he had asked a thoughtful question that made me rethink something I had said. After class, he caught up with me in the hallway. He said, "I was wondering about your point. You said that people who commit fraud often start small and then escalate. Do you think that's always the case? Or do you think some people are capable of planning large-scale fraud from the beginning?" It was a genuine question. It was intellectual. It wasn't flirting. It was just a conversation about ideas. But I was suspicious. I had learned through my stepfather that charm was a mask that people wore, that niceness could hide something much darker underneath, that men who seemed too good to be true usually were. "I'm not sure," I said carefully. "I think it depends on the person's psychology. Some people are inherently dishonest, and some people become dishonest through a process of rationalization and incrementalism." "That's interesting," he said. "I wonder which one is more dangerous." We talked for maybe 5 minutes before I excused myself, but he didn't push. He didn't try to get my phone number or ask me out. He just smiled and said, "Thanks for the conversation. I found that helpful." I saw him around campus after that, in the library, at the dining hall, at a student business club meeting that we both attended, and every time he was exactly the same: polite, respectful, not trying to impress me with displays of wealth or status. He just seemed interested in ideas and in people. By the beginning of senior year, I had started to let my guard down a little. We ended up in the same study group for one of our classes. The study group was 3 other people plus James and me. We met in the library every Tuesday and Thursday evening. I watched James in those study sessions. I watched how he treated the other people in the group. He was genuinely interested in what they thought. He asked for their opinions and actually listened to the answers. He didn't try to dominate conversations. He didn't need to be the smartest person in the room. When someone else knew something, he acknowledged it and thanked them for teaching him something new. This was so fundamentally different from what I was used to that I almost didn't know how to process it. In my experience, men used intelligence as a weapon. They used their knowledge to make other people feel small. James didn't do that. He seemed to actually enjoy learning from other people. One day, after one of our study sessions, James asked if I wanted to get dinner, just the 2 of us, not as part of the group, but as something else. A date, I realized. He was asking me out. And despite my suspicions, despite my training, despite every alarm bell that was going off in my head, I said yes. "I'd like that," I said. James and I started dating in October of my senior year. He was the most respectful person I had ever been in a romantic relationship with. And honestly, he was the first person I'd ever been in a relationship with who treated me with actual respect. He asked before he touched me. He asked about my day and genuinely listened to the answer. He didn't try to change me or improve me. He didn't point out my faults as if it was his responsibility to fix them. He seemed to actually like me exactly as I was. My sarcasm, my defensiveness, my tendency to intellectualize my emotions instead of feeling them. It took me months to believe it was real. I remember the first time he said, "I love you." We were sitting in his apartment, which was nice, not fancy, but nice, clean, organized, full of books. He had made us tea and we were sitting on his couch, and I was telling him about something that had happened with my family. I had been trying to stand up to my stepfather about something I can't even remember now, and it had gone badly. He had twisted my words, made me feel like I was the one in the wrong, and my mother had sided with him.
"I love you," he said. He said it quietly, like it was the most obvious fact in the world. "And I want you to know that the way he treats you isn't okay. It's not your fault, and you deserve better." I cried. I actually cried because I had never heard those words from someone who wasn't obligated to love me. I had never been told that what was happening to me was wrong and that I deserved better, from someone who would gain nothing by lying to me. My mother liked James. She said he seemed kind. Even my stepfather couldn't find much to criticize about him, which only made me more suspicious that he was too good to be true. David seemed almost impressed by James, by the fact that he had a good job, that he was intelligent, that he moved through the world with confidence. It was like David could recognize something in James that he wanted to associate with. But he was also jealous. I could see it. I could see him resenting the fact that I had someone in my life who valued me, who treated me with respect, who didn't need anything from me except my company and my honesty. After college, James and I moved into an apartment together in Detroit. He had gotten a job as a management consultant at a firm downtown. I had gotten a job in the business operations department at a major healthcare company. We were both making decent money. We were both doing well. And James was still consistently respectful, consistently kind, consistently present. He never forgot our anniversary. He never forgot to ask how my day was. He never criticized my appearance or my choices. He never made me feel small. By the time we'd been together for 3 years, I had started to believe that maybe I deserved good things. Maybe my stepfather was wrong about me. Maybe I wasn't broken. Maybe I was just a normal woman who had been treated badly and was allowed to heal. James proposed on a Thursday evening in April. We had gone to a jazz concert at the Detroit Opera House, something James knew I loved. Afterward, we'd walked down to the Riverwalk, where the Detroit River flows past the city, where the lights reflected off the water, where everything felt romantic and timeless. He had gotten down on one knee and he had pulled out a ring. It wasn't ostentatious. It was simple and elegant, a diamond on a white gold band. He had chosen it carefully, he would tell me later, because he wanted something that matched me, beautiful but not showy, classic but with depth. "Serena," he said, "I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" I said yes. I was crying, he was crying. It was perfect. When I told my mother, she cried too. She came over to my apartment and held me, and she seemed genuinely happy for me. But there was something in her face that I noticed, a look of loss, maybe, or regret. She was happy for me, genuinely, but there was something else underneath it, something that looked like grief for the years she had lost, for the way she had failed to protect me, for the choice she had made to stay with David instead of standing up for me. "Your father would have loved to see this," she said. "He would have been so proud of you." My stepfather's response was different. When my mother told him about the engagement, he nodded and said, "Congratulations," but his tone was flat. And I saw something cross his face that looked like calculation, like he was assessing something, like he was trying to figure out how to take advantage of this situation. 2 weeks after we announced the engagement, my stepfather asked my mother for a family meeting. They did this sometimes, called for family meetings to discuss important matters. Usually, these meetings ended with my mother and I agreeing to do whatever David wanted. But this time, the meeting was about something specific, and it would change everything. My stepfather began by talking about college. Jade was now 18 years old, a senior in high school, preparing to go to college in the fall. He said that college was expensive, that he wanted to make sure Jade had the best educational experience, that he wanted her to be able to attend a good university without the burden of debt. All reasonable things, all things that a parent should want for their child. But then he pivoted. "I've been thinking about Serena's wedding fund," he said, turning to look at me directly. His eyes were cold. "I think it's time we had a discussion about that." I felt my stomach tighten. "What about it?" I asked carefully. "I think it's time to use that money for something else," he said. And he was looking at me when he said it, but his words were directed at my mother. "Jade is going to need help with college. Her tuition is going to be substantial. And this fund has been just sitting there for 16 years, accumulating interest, not doing anything useful. I think it makes more sense to use it for Jade's education." "That's Serena's money," said my mother. Her voice was quiet, which immediately told me that she was already wavering. Her father set that up for her wedding. Her father has been dead for 16 years, he said. His voice was very calm, but I could hear the edge underneath it. And I care about my daughter's future, and I think it's time that Serena understood that her needs aren't more important than Jade's. My mother didn't say anything. I could feel her shutting down, could feel her removing herself from the situation, could feel her choosing peace over advocating for me. I want access to that account, David said, and I want it transferred to an educational savings plan for Jade, immediately. I can't do that, my mother said. Her voice was very small. That trust has specific conditions. I can't just transfer it without... You can, and you will, or we're going to have some serious problems in this marriage. That was the moment my mother folded. I could see it happen in real time. I could see her decide that keeping David in her life was more important than keeping the promise my father had made to me 16 years ago. I could see her choose her husband over her daughter's future. I'll look into it, she said quietly. That night, after the meeting, I called my mother and I asked her directly. He wants the money, doesn't he? I said. Serena, she started. Tell me the truth, Mom. She was quiet for a long time. Then, yes, he says Jade needs it for college and that you're old enough now that you don't need it for your wedding. He says you're marrying someone who has money and that it doesn't make sense for the fund to go to waste on someone who's already financially secure. That's not his money, I said. That's my money. That's my father's money. That's my father's love and faith in my future. I know, baby, I know, but your stepfather is being very insistent. He says if I don't do this, our marriage could end. The implication was clear. My mother had already chosen David. She had already decided that her marriage to him was more important than her promise to me, more important than her dead husband's legacy, more important than her daughter's future. Then maybe it should, I said. Maybe you should leave him. But I knew, even as I said it, that my mother would never leave David. She had already chosen him. She had chosen him when she married him. She had chosen him every day since then. She had chosen him over me again and again, in small ways and large ways. She had chosen him, and now she was going to choose him one more time. 3 weeks before my wedding, my stepfather had the money transferred. He did it without my permission, without my knowledge, without my consent. He had convinced my mother to sign papers giving him power of attorney over the account, a legal document that she signed without telling me, without consulting me, without asking my opinion. I found out about it when I went to the bank to check the balance. I had been thinking about using some of the money for the wedding, and I wanted to verify the amount. I wanted to see how much my father had saved for me over the years. The account was nearly empty. There was only about $500 remaining, the original amount my father had deposited all those years ago, the day I was born. The rest was gone. $86,500. Gone. I called the bank and asked them where the money had gone. They explained that there had been a large transfer to a different account, one registered under my stepfather's name. They showed me the paperwork, the power of attorney documents, all of it signed by my mother. I called my mother immediately. Did he take it? I asked. I was trying to keep my voice calm, but I could feel myself starting to shake with rage. Yes, she said. Her voice was hollow, like she was speaking from very far away. How could you let him do that? I didn't know what else to do, my mother said. He was going to leave me. He said if I didn't do it, he would leave and I would be alone again. And I couldn't. I couldn't go back to being alone. And there it was, the real reason, the truth underneath all the justifications. My mother had been so desperate not to be alone that she had sacrificed her daughter's future. She had taken a gift that my father had given to me, a physical manifestation of his love, and she had handed it over to my stepfather because she was afraid of losing him. I'm going to be honest with you, I said,
and my voice was shaking with anger. "I don't know if I can forgive you for this. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again." I didn't speak to my mother for 2 weeks after that. I couldn't. What she had done felt like a betrayal on a level I didn't have words for. She had taken something that was sacred to me, something that represented my father's love, and she had given it away to her stepfather because she was afraid of losing him. I told James about it the same day I found out. I expected him to be angry, to validate my anger, to rage against the injustice of what had happened. I expected him to be on my side, to tell me that my mother was wrong, that my stepfather was a thief. Instead, he was very quiet. He listened while I cried and told him the whole story. I told him about the fund, about my father's dream for me, about how David had manipulated my mother into giving him access. I told him about how violated I felt, how betrayed, how angry. And when I finished, he said something that I didn't understand at the time. "It's going to be okay," he said. "You don't need that money. I've got you." I didn't fully believe him, but I was grateful that he didn't make it worse. I was grateful that he just held me while I cried. "Tell me about the fund," he said. "Tell me about your father. Tell me why it matters so much." So I did. I told him about my father, about how he had saved for my wedding from the moment I was born. I told him about the Tuesday afternoons at the park, about the way he would listen to me talk about my day. I told him about how my father had shown me what unconditional love looked like. And James listened. He actually listened. He understood that this wasn't just about money. This was about legacy. This was about my father's faith in me, his belief that I deserved to have choices, deserved to have a beautiful start to my married life. "We're going to fix this," he said finally. "I don't know how yet, but we're going to make sure that your father's love for you isn't taken away by your stepfather's greed. I promise you that." 3 days before my wedding, my stepfather called James. This shocked me because they had never spoken on the phone before, had barely spoken at all beyond polite greetings. But David called James and asked to meet with him before the wedding ceremony. I remember being confused when James told me about this. "What does he want to talk to you about?" I asked. He didn't say. He just asked if we could meet. I told him yes. "James, I don't trust him. Be careful. He's very manipulative. He's going to try to—" "I know," James said. "I'm aware of who he is. I'll be fine." The meeting happened on Friday evening at a coffee shop near downtown. I didn't go. James said David had requested that I not be there. He came home afterwards looking, I don't know, different, like something had shifted in him in a way that I couldn't quite identify. "What did he want?" I asked. "Just to talk," James said. "Nothing serious." But he wouldn't tell me what about, and something in his tone suggested that I shouldn't push it. "James, please tell me what he said." He asked me some things about my background, about my job, my finances, that kind of thing. He wanted to know if I was going to take care of you. He wanted to make sure you would be financially secure. It sounded reasonable. It sounded like a father-in-law asking protective questions before his stepdaughter got married. But I knew my stepfather. I knew that there was more to this than what James was telling me. I knew that David was incapable of asking questions out of genuine concern. He was always working an angle. "That's all?" I pressed. "That's all," James said. But he was lying. I could tell he was lying. He knew something that he wasn't telling me. But I didn't push further. James was a grown man. If he said he had it handled, I had to trust that he did. "Okay," I said. "I trust you." My wedding day arrived. August is hot and humid in Detroit, but the morning was beautiful. Clear sky, mild temperature, no clouds. It felt like the universe was cooperating with my need for everything to be perfect. My dress was white, fitted through the bodice and flowing in the skirt. My mother had helped me into it, and even though we had barely spoken in the weeks since the fund incident, she looked at me in that dress and she cried. "You look beautiful," she said. "You look absolutely beautiful. Your father would be so proud." I didn't respond to that. I couldn't. The words were too charged. My father was proud, but he was also dead, and his money was stolen, and my mother had allowed it to happen. But I didn't say any of that. I just smiled and hugged my mother and thanked her for her help.
The wedding was held at the Detroit Institute of Arts. James had booked the Rivera Court, a stunning space with murals by Diego Rivera painted directly on the walls. It was romantic and artistic and perfect. The walls were covered with images of Detroit's history, of workers and industry and labor. It felt right. My stepfather sat in the front row with my mother and Jade. Jade was a bridesmaid. My mother was wearing a dress that David had chosen for her. My stepfather was wearing an expensive suit and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. James stood at the altar with his best man, and when I walked toward him, he actually cried. Actual tears ran down his face as he watched me come to him. He was looking at me like I was the most precious thing he had ever seen. The ceremony was short and simple. We had written our own vows. When it came time for me to speak, I looked at James and I thought about everything he had been to me. I thought about how he had treated me with respect when no one else had. I thought about how he had listened when I needed him to listen. I thought about how he had seen me, really seen me, for who I was, not for what I could do for him, not for how I could serve him, but just for me. I said, "James, you have shown me what it means to be loved without conditions. You have shown me that I am worthy of respect and kindness and genuine affection. You have shown me that love is not about control or manipulation or power games. Love is about seeing someone, really seeing them, and choosing to value them anyway. I promise to spend my life being worthy of the way you treat me. I promise to love you the way you love me. I promise to build a life with you that is honest and true and kind." When James spoke, I noticed that he kept looking past me, toward the audience. At first, I thought he was nervous, that he was trying to calm himself by not making direct eye contact. But then I realized he was looking directly at my stepfather. He was looking directly at David while he spoke his vows. "Serena," he said, his voice steady and strong, "I love you. I want to build a life with you. I want to support you and honor you and respect your decisions. I promise to be a partner who sees you, values you, and respects your autonomy. I promise that you will never have to shrink yourself for me, never have to earn my love, never have to ask permission to be yourself." He paused. I could see something in his jaw tighten, could see something shift in his expression. "And I want you to know that I will take care of you," he continued, and his voice had become harder, more pointed. "You will never have to worry about money, never have to fear abandonment, never have to make decisions based on fear of being alone. I am here. I will be here. That's a promise I make to you today, in front of everyone you love and everyone who loves you." He was still looking at my stepfather when he said this, and I saw David's face go pale. There was something in James's vows that was a message. There was something underneath the words that he was saying directly to my stepfather, and David understood. I could see it in his face. He understood that James was claiming me, that James was putting my stepfather on notice that I was no longer vulnerable, that I was no longer someone he could hurt. The reception was held at the same venue, in an adjacent room. We had invited about 150 people. There was music, dancing, food. There was champagne and joy and celebration. It was a beautiful reception. It was exactly what I had imagined my wedding would be like. And then, about 3 hours into the reception, everything changed. David had been drinking. I could see it in the way he moved, the way his speech was slightly slurred when he talked to people. He had been positioning himself as an important figure in the room, telling people about his business successes, about how he was mentoring me into understanding how to handle money properly. He was telling people that Jade was at an excellent university thanks to his financial planning. He was taking credit for things he had no right to take credit for. At one point, I watched as he took a phone call. His face went red, then white. He stepped away from the party, walked into a hallway, and I could see him from where I was standing with James, his back against the wall, his free hand making frantic gestures as he talked on the phone. Even though I couldn't hear the words, I could tell that he was upset about something, very upset. His voice was getting louder. He was becoming agitated. When he came back into the reception, his face had changed. It had gone very pale. He looked shaken. He looked afraid. James leaned over to me and whispered, "It's time." "Time for what?" I asked. "You'll see," he said, and he walked toward the microphone. The DJ, understanding something I didn't understand, perhaps because James had arranged this beforehand, handed James the microphone and started lowering the music. "Can I have everyone's attention?" James said. His voice was calm, but there was something under it, something like controlled fury, but also something like vindication, like he had been waiting for this moment, preparing for this moment. The room quieted. Everyone turned to look at him. "I want to say something," James said. "Most of you don't know me very well. I'm the groom. I'm Serena's husband as of about 4 hours ago, and I want to talk about something that happened 3 days ago." He looked directly at David. His eyes were cold. "I received a visit from Serena's stepfather. He came to meet me, ostensibly to welcome me to the family, and to make sure I was going to take care of his stepdaughter. But what he actually wanted was to request something from me, something that made it very clear to me who he is and what his priorities are." My stepfather stood up. He looked like he wanted to leave, but something in the way the crowd had turned to look at him made him sit back down. He explained that he needed the money for his daughter's college education. He said that Serena didn't need it, that she was making good money, that it would be better used for his daughter. He was very persuasive. He explained how reasonable this request was. He made it sound logical, fair, like it was the right thing to do. James paused. The room was completely silent. "What he didn't know," James said, and his voice got harder, was that the wedding fund in question had already been emptied. He had already taken that money, about 3 months ago, without Serena's permission or knowledge. He had convinced Serena's mother to sign power of attorney papers, and he had transferred $86,500 from an account that was set up by Serena's father, specifically for her wedding, into an account in his own name. I heard my mother gasp. She had not known that David was planning to do this with the stolen money. I could see the realization crossing her face, the understanding that David had lied to her, that he had taken money that wasn't his, that he had committed fraud. "And when he came to meet me 3 days ago," James said, his voice getting colder, "he was trying to convince me to help him cover up what he'd already done. He was asking me, very politely, to give him money that I would presumably take from Serena to replace what he had stolen. He was trying to get me to be complicit in his theft." David stood up. "This is bullshit," he said loudly. He was slurring slightly. "You don't know anything about—" "I know everything," James said. His voice cut through David's denial like a knife. "I know about the way you've treated Serena for the past 11 years. I know about the emotional abuse. I know about the way you've systematically tried to diminish her and make her feel like she's not worthy of respect. I know about the way you've manipulated her mother. I know about how you've positioned yourself to extract resources from Serena by making her feel guilty for existing." The room was dead silent. People were staring at David with expressions of disgust and shock. "I am a lawyer," James said. His voice had become very formal, very professional. "I also own a consulting firm that manages acquisitions and corporate restructuring, and Serena's father set that fund up in a specific way. It was protected by law. It couldn't be accessed without Serena's permission or without a court order. The only way you got that money was through fraud, by forging documents, by misrepresenting your authority, by taking advantage of Serena's mother's vulnerabilities." James turned to my stepfather directly. His eyes were cold. "And I've already filed a police report," he said calmly. "The Detroit Police Department is aware of what you did. You have until Monday morning to return the money, or I will press charges for fraud and theft." David's face went from red to white to something in between. He stood there, and for the first time in my life, I saw him look afraid. I saw him look like a man who had been exposed, who had been caught, who understood that his carefully constructed image was crumbling. "Furthermore," James said, and now he was looking at a man in the audience, someone I recognized as David's employer from family gatherings, "Mr. Pierce, I wanted you to be aware that David Turner has embezzled approximately $300,000 from your company over the past 18 months. My firm has documentation of this. I was planning to speak with you on Monday morning, but since we're all here together, it seems more efficient to address it now." James handed something to David's employer. It was a folder, thick with papers, dozens of pages of documentation, evidence, proof. David's employer opened the folder and started scanning the documents. His face got darker with every page he turned. I could see him understanding the scope of the fraud, the planning that had gone into it, the fact that David had been systematically stealing from his company for years. "You're fired," to David, he said. "As of right now, don't come back to the office. We'll have security escort you out on Monday morning, and we'll be pursuing this with law enforcement as well." The words hung in the air. Fired. In public, in front of everyone he knew. Then David's employer looked at me and James. "Congratulations on your wedding, and thank you for bringing this to my attention, even on your wedding day. That took integrity." He shook James's hand and left the reception. David tried to follow him, but James caught his arm. "I'm not done," James said quietly. And then, in a voice loud enough for the whole room to hear, James let go of David's arm and took a step back. "I want everyone here to understand something. This man, David Turner, has stolen from his employer, from his stepdaughter, and from his wife. He has built his life on taking resources from people who trusted him. He has used emotional manipulation and legal fraud to extract money and power. And he thought he could continue to do that because the people he took from didn't have the resources to fight back." James's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. "But Serena married me, and I have resources. I have the ability to see fraud and document it, and I have the intention to make sure that justice is served." He turned to me. "Serena, I want to make a statement for everyone here to hear and for the record. Everything that David took from you, I will replace. The wedding fund, the emotional cost of his abuse, the years of feeling diminished and undervalued, I will make sure that you are whole again. Not because you need me to, but because it's the right thing to do. And because I love you." And then he kissed me, right there in front of everyone, while my stepfather stood pale and shocked and completely exposed. He kissed me like he was claiming me, like he was putting the world on notice that I was loved, that I was valued, that I was no longer alone. The room erupted. There was applause. There were people standing up and clapping. There were people looking at David with disgust and anger. David didn't say anything. He didn't try to defend himself or explain away what had been revealed. He just stood there, and then he walked toward the exit. My mother didn't follow him. She sat in her chair looking shell-shocked, looking like her entire world had just collapsed. After the shock of what had happened began to wear off, after people had returned to their tables and the DJ had carefully restarted the music, James took me aside to a private room off the reception hall. "There's something I need to tell you, and I want you to hear it directly from me before you hear it from anyone else." "What?" I asked. I was still in shock, still processing what had just happened. "I need to tell you about my background and my business and who I really am. I need to tell you why I was able to do what I just did." He took my hands. "I'm not just a management consultant," he said, "which is technically true, but it's not the whole story. My consulting firm specializes in uncovering fraud and corporate malfeasance, but more importantly, my family has significant wealth. We come from old money in Detroit. My parents are wealthy, and they passed a substantial inheritance to me when I turned 25. I didn't respond. I was trying to process what he was saying. I have approximately $8.2 million in liquid assets. I own properties, I have investments, I have significant income from multiple sources. I'm what people would call wealthy, and probably would call me privileged, though I've tried very hard not to act like it." "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not for what I have. I wanted to know that you chose me because you genuinely cared about me, not because I could take care of you financially. I wanted our relationship to be based on something real, something that couldn't be taken away or used as leverage. I wanted you to trust me because of who I am, not because I have money."
I thought about that. I thought about how James had never made me feel like I needed to be grateful to him, how he had treated me with consistent respect, how he had never tried to buy my affection or use money to control me. "I didn't know about your stepfather until 3 months ago," James continued. "You mentioned him one day and you said something about a wedding fund and how you were worried he might try to access it. So I did some digging. I hired a private investigator to look into his finances." "You hired a private investigator?" I asked. "I did," he said. "I found out what he'd done. I found out about the fraud, the theft, the way he'd stolen from your account. And I found out about his embezzlement from his employer. I documented everything." "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Because I wanted to make sure I had everything documented first," he said. "I wanted to make sure that when I exposed him, it would stick. I didn't want there to be any way for him to deny it or wiggle out of it. I wanted to make sure that he would face real consequences." "So you planned this whole wedding day confrontation?" I asked. "I did. I wanted you to be married to me when it happened, so he couldn't use me as some outside interference. I wanted you to have the protection and the status of being my wife when he was exposed. I wanted him to understand that you are no longer alone, no longer vulnerable to his manipulation." I should have been angry that he had orchestrated this without me knowing, but I wasn't. I was relieved. I was grateful, and I was starting to understand that what James had done was not about controlling me the way my stepfather controlled things. It was about protecting me in the way my father had tried to protect me, by making sure I had resources and choices. "I also want to tell you something," James said. "Your father's wedding fund, the original fund, the one with the money that your stepfather took, I'm going to fully replace it. I'm going to put $87,000 back into a fund in your name, under your complete control, with your authority only. That was your father's gift to you, and I'm not going to let David's theft take that away from you." I cried then. I cried because my father's love for me was being honored. I cried because I finally had someone in my life who saw me, valued me, and was willing to fight for me. I cried because I was safe in a way I had never been safe before. "And I want you to know," James said, "that everything I have is available to you, not because you need it, but because we're partners. Your money is your money. My money is our money if you choose for it to be. You have full autonomy and full choice. You will never have to ask permission. You will never have to make decisions based on fear." My stepfather was arrested on Monday morning. The fraud charges were substantial. The embezzlement from his employer, combined with the theft from my wedding fund, combined with the documentation that James provided, meant that he was facing multiple felony charges. He hired a lawyer. He tried to argue that my mother had given him permission to access the fund, that there had been no fraud, that everything had been consensual, but the documentation was clear. The forged signatures, the false power of attorney documents, the transfers made without proper authorization, It all painted a picture of systematic fraud. He pleaded guilty to avoid a lengthy trial. He was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison for the embezzlement charges and an additional 3 years for fraud. When he's released, he'll be in his early 60s. He'll have a felony record. He'll have no career prospects. He'll have burned every bridge he had. Jade was devastated by what happened to her father. At first, she tried to defend him, to argue that he wasn't as bad as people were saying. But over time, with therapy and with distance from his influence, she started to understand what he had done to her, what kind of man he really was. My mother was devastated in a different way. She had to come to terms with the fact that the man she had chosen, the man she had married to avoid being alone, was a thief and a fraud. She had to face the fact that she had been manipulated. She had to understand that she had been complicit in stealing from her own daughter. But something shifted in her after that. The spell that David had cast on her broke. She started to see clearly what had happened. She started to see how she had changed, how she had allowed herself to become diminished, how she had sacrificed her daughter to maintain a marriage that was built on fraud. She came to see me 3 weeks after the wedding. She was crying before she even sat down. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry for what I let him do to you. I'm sorry for taking the money. I'm sorry for not protecting you the way your father would have wanted me to." "I know," I said, and I forgave her, not because what she did was okay, but because I understood that she had been manipulated the same way David had manipulated me. She was victimized by him, even though she was an adult, even though she was my mother. Over time, my mother started therapy. She started to understand the patterns of control and manipulation that she had been subject to. She started to understand that she made a mistake and that she was working to fix it. We rebuilt our relationship slowly. It wasn't the same as it had been before David came into our lives, but it was something real, something based on truth and acknowledgement of what had happened. It's been 6 months since my wedding. I'm sitting on the rooftop garden of the apartment that James and I bought together, a beautiful space in downtown Detroit overlooking the river. The garden is filled with plants that I've chosen, that I'm learning to care for. I water them carefully. I talk to them. I'm learning that even plants need attention and care to grow. James is inside, working on a case. He's not in the room with me, but I can see him through the glass doors, sitting at a desk in our study, focused on the work in front of him. Sometimes he looks up and smiles at me through the glass. It's a quiet kind of presence. He doesn't demand my attention. He's just there, available. My mother's doing better. She's working at the hospital again, and she's rebuilding her life. She's been seeing a therapist. She's learning about patterns of control and how to recognize them. She's learning how to have boundaries. She's learning how to say no. She called me last week and said, "I'm proud of you. I know I wasn't for a long time, but I'm proud of you now. I'm proud of the way you stood up for yourself, the way you refused to make you feel small." I told her, "I'm proud of you too. I'm proud that you're doing the work to understand what happened and that you're trying to be better." Jade is with her mother most of the time now. David doesn't have custody rights, and my mother is being very intentional about teaching Jade how to have healthy relationships. Jade still struggles with some of the things my stepfather taught her, the entitlement, the lack of empathy, the idea that it's acceptable to hurt people if it benefits you. But she's young, she has time to learn better. James funded a therapist for Jade as well. He didn't do it for recognition or gratitude. He did it because he understood that Jade was also a victim of David's toxicity, just in a different way.
And me, I'm learning how to live without fear. I'm learning what it feels like to be valued. I'm learning that I didn't deserve what happened to me, that it wasn't my fault, that my stepfather's cruelty had nothing to do with who I am. I'm learning that my father's faith in me was justified. I did have a wedding. I did have love. I did have a life worth building toward. And my husband, this man who loves me without conditions, who has never once tried to control me or diminish me, who has the resources to hurt me and chooses instead to protect me, He is the embodiment of what my father wanted for me when he opened that savings account all those years ago. My father wanted me to have choices, and now I do. I have the choice to stay in this marriage because I want to, not because I'm dependent on James. I have the choice to make my own decisions about my career, my money, my life. I've decided to leave my job at the healthcare company and start my own business. James is supporting this decision completely, though he offered to fund it. I told him I wanted to do it myself, to build something that was mine, something that I could be proud of because I created it. He smiled when I said that. He understood immediately why that mattered. People often ask me how I can forgive my mother, how I can forgive the fact that she took the money that my father set aside for me and gave it to my stepfather, how I can look at her without anger. The answer is that I understand now that forgiveness isn't about saying what she did was okay. It's about understanding that she was also a victim of the same man who victimized me. She was just a more subtle victim. She lost her autonomy, her independence, her sense of self. And in losing those things, she lost the ability to protect her daughter. That's not an excuse for what she did, but it's an explanation, and understanding the explanation has allowed me to see my mother with compassion instead of just anger. People also ask me if I feel like my stepfather got what he deserved, and I don't know how to answer that. He's going to prison, he's lost his career, he's lost his family, he's going to be alone for a long time. But he caused real damage. He caused damage to my mother. He caused damage to me. He caused damage to Jade. And I'm not sure that prison time is equivalent to that damage. I'm not sure there's any punishment that could be. What I do know is that he's no longer in a position to hurt anyone. That matters. What I also know is that my father's love for me was real. Even though he's been gone for 16 years, his love reached across time and protected me. He set up that fund with the intention of giving me choices, and even though my stepfather was able to take the money, he wasn't able to take the intention. He wasn't able to take the love. And now I have someone else in my life who also loves me, who also wants to give me choices, who also respects my autonomy. And that feels like my father's faith in me has been justified. It feels like he knew something good was going to happen, and he set up that fund so I would have resources to build on it. My wedding fund was meant to give me a beautiful wedding and a fresh start. It did, eventually. It just took a longer, more complicated path than my father expected. But I'm here. I'm safe. I'm valued. I'm loved. And I'm never going back. Thank you for listening to my story. If you experienced something similar, if someone took something from you, if someone tried to make you small, if someone tried to convince you that you weren't worthy of love and respect, I want you to know it wasn't your fault, and you deserve better. You deserve to be valued. You deserve to have choices. You deserve to be loved the way my father wanted me to be loved. Unconditionally, respectfully, with the understanding that your life is yours and yours alone. You deserve to have someone who sees you, really sees you, and chooses to value you anyway. That's the most important thing I have to say. Thank you for listening.